Welcome to I Wish You Could Hear This, where we explore great stories and simple proven steps to help you thrive in life, faith, and relationships.
In our research, we've heard hundreds of hope-filled strategies for marriage, parenting, leadership, and life that are grounded in science and consistent with biblical truth. And now you can hear them too.
Okay, we are back with a part two of just an incredibly important conversation with Matthew and Joanna Raabsmith about sexual addiction and betrayal trauma. And as certified coaches in this area, and Joanna being a licensed marriage and family therapist and a trauma therapist, they shared in part one their story of Matthew having to confess that he had been caught in sexual addiction for years and compulsion, and what they did to get out of that, and then now how they have helped other couples find healing. And so in this part two, we want to really get into the practical things because in part one, Joanna shared a story of how this all started when she was taking her very first class as a marriage and family therapist, and somebody came in and gave their testimony and presented a list, and she then confronted Matthew and said, "Is this really going on with you?" And okay, here's a list. And so I want to know what is in that list. What did you do? And so just to get us started, I want to get in a minute into your book. You have a book called Building True Intimacy. And I want to get into that. But I want to, before we do that, I'm curious if that book comes out of a framework from that list, or if that list was just a starting point. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, that's such a great question. So back when we started recovery over a decade ago, there was not a lot of resources and there was not a lot of frameworks at the time. And so that list was mainly resources for Matthew to heal out of the sexual addiction side. And so It was fantastic for that in the beginning. But we realized really quickly we're going to need a whole lot more than just that because it's impacted him, it's impacted me, and it's impacted our relationship. And so I kind of had to dig around to find my own resources. And then as a couple, we kind of wandered through the desert for a while trying to figure out what are the relational pieces. And so our book and that framework of the intimacy pyramid really was from our own journey and our professional experience, trying to create a roadmap for couples wanting to heal their relationship
side of things.
Yes.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is we found, but the concepts are still the same.
Yeah.
The individual process that I had to go through early on in recovery really mirrors what the couple goes through. Mm-hmm. And so just to kind of give you an example, the very first thing I had to do was to get honest. I had spent so many years not only lying to other people, I lied to myself. I told myself constantly, it's not that big a deal, everybody does it, right? But I also would lie and tell myself, like, if anyone knows, they'll leave you. So there were all these lies that I was living. And so to get free, part of the list that Joanna handed me was to go to a men's intensive where we all got honest about sexual addiction and the way it rolled into my life. And I had 3 days kind of sequestered with a group of 30 guys, and we really started unpacking not only what we were doing in the present, but what had happened in the past. And that's really part of the work. Part of the work is not only being honest, but it's dealing with what you have to be honest about. It's dealing with the work, right? It was one thing to say, hey, I do this. These things happened to me as a kid, right? All of these experiences that build up to this. But just saying that doesn't heal it. It names it, but it doesn't truly heal it. And so I did work with a therapist, with counseling. I did 12-step group programs. I started meeting with men really for the first time in my life. I had really avoided relationships with men for a long time because of some of my childhood experiences and really kind of isolated myself. And so I started to learn how to live in community, how to really build deeper and deeper relationships. And as I was going through this individual work, And Joanna was starting to do her work as well. We started to see how the pieces really aligned for the relationship as
so
well.
you kind of mentioned that honesty piece. That's the bottom layer of the pyramid. And
So we're picturing a pyramid.
Yes,
Yes.
With the
picture
bottom
kind of a
layer.
triangle. Yep. And so
Okay.
if you know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's these
Yeah.
different layers of the pyramid, right, that build on top of each other. That bottom layer is honesty. And so he had to get honest with himself if he was going to then bring honesty into the relationship. So it was really important for him to do his own individual work, get honest with himself. He was able to share his story with the guys at that intensive, the guys in his 12-step group, to prepare him to then bring honesty into the relationship. And so one of the important pieces of honesty relationally is called a full therapeutic disclosure. And that's where he basically took all of that and came and shared it with me. So I had the same understanding of him and the reality of our relationship, because I can't be honest if I don't know. And so much of the reality I lived through was kept hidden. And so it was a way that he then helped me step into the reality of our story and empowered me to then make decisions based on that.
Let me just pause for just a second and say the full therapeutic disclosure. One of the things that I know many therapists recommend, and I don't know where you stand on this, but many people say don't try to do that full therapeutic disclosure without the help of a therapist.
Absolutely.
Because you're going into places that the person who's hearing it needs the help to process it as well. Now, that's not to say hold on to lies. You know, obviously we're talking about some of these things, but it's one thing to say, you know, hey, honey, just so you know, when I was a teenager, I was engaged in online pornography a lot, and it comes up in my life occasionally, and I'm in a moment of wrestling with that. Could you pray for me? And can we get covenant eyes on our internet? Like, and that's one thing. Like to say like that kind of thing, that's a different situation than I've been living a lie for 10 years in our marriage, and there's all this stuff that's piled up that I need to disclose to you. And you know, the proverbial, you've just taken this giant full suitcase that you've been carrying around, this weight, and you've just transferred it to your spouse. And that you need therapeutic help with.
You do.
But so when you talk about that, I just want to make sure that we're on the same page of, if you're listening to this and it's really more of a matter of, you know, I've got some things I probably need to just be more open about and vulnerable about, and it's not that same level. We're not saying you have to have a therapist in order to talk to your spouse. No.
Well, and what we love is there are these really big moments. Like we spend weeks with a couple preparing a full disclosure, but we will also let that couple know this is the new way of living. Not I'm dumping all this new information on you, but I actually learn to live in transparency. And that's really where honesty is restored in the relationship. I had to figure out how to be honest about everything. I mean, as someone who would hide pornography, I would also hide the sweets that I would eat. I would hide how much time I watch TV. I was hiding everything. And so part of my really transformation became getting comfortable talking about stuff and not confessing necessarily, but just being open about it and learning to live in that openness so that our relationship could actually find deeper connection.
But it's hard to be open and transparent on a daily basis if you haven't kind of pressed the reset button on honesty, because it's going to start to bring up questions like, wait, what you're telling me now doesn't fit with what I thought was going on, right? That's why you need that full therapeutic disclosure. We got to get real about the past so we can be transparent on an ongoing basis. And what happens? Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I'm completely taking over all the questions. I'm looking here at Jeff going, I'm so sorry. I'm like,
you get the training in this.
Well, it's an area that you and I have both researched for so many years. But I'm curious. One of the things that I'm curious, Joanna, was there anything that you had to get honest about?
Yeah. So for the partner, usually the honesty is around the impact of what they're now hearing. And so there have been times where we've done double disclosures with couples where there's betrayal on both sides. And so every couple is obviously unique. And so going, okay, what does honesty look like for this couple? For most couples, for that betrayed spouse, it's being able to be honest in the relationship about the impact and what they're experiencing now because of the betrayal. And we actually have a very structured formal process for that called an impact letter or a loss letter, where they get to describe the pain, the hurt, what they've lost because of the reality of what they're hearing in that full disclosure.
So as I'm hearing this, I'm running it through kind of my grid and some things that I've heard in the past. I'm a Enneagram 1 for those out there who know the Enneagram. So I'm the moral perfectionist in our family.
Love it.
Yes, he is.
My inner critic on me, I know where I'm missing the mark, and I also know where Shaunti's missing the mark, unfortunately. But I remember hearing a story of a ex-pastor and his wife where the pastor had a moral failing and had an affair, and he was devastated. I'm going to just go from his perspective. His was the how could I have done this sort of thing. So he was devastated, and his wife came alongside him and supported him. She was very compassionate and everything. And she said it went on for, months, his despair and despondency. And finally, one day, I heard him out in the garage working on something, and he was whistling. And I went, hey, wait a minute, buddy. You don't have a right to be happy yet. She had to confront the fact that she was like, there's still some penance that need to be done here. So I get on the side of the betrayed spouse, how do they, get to the point of, okay, let's turn the page or something like that.
Yeah. No, I think that's so good, because what we find, what you describe is actually more common than you would imagine, right? You have this very broken, often traumatized individual who has had the addiction, has committed the betrayal. That's usually the reason, right? That root pain that has led to them going so far outside their value system. They're now getting honest, they're in recovery, but they have a lot of healing to do before they're strong. And that partner who's just been hurt, they kind of know that. So they stay strong. They keep the family together. They keep the kids okay, right? They shove their pain down in some ways to keep enough stability for the family to survive while their partner is getting healthier. What's amazing, what's really interesting is as they start, right, the betrayed spouse starts to feel safer because their partner is getting healthy, their body knows it's safe to feel my pain now. It's safe to finally let myself break apart. And I have to break apart so I can heal. It's that grieving process, right? When you lose a loved one, you have to go through that grieving process if you really want to heal. And so, but it's very confusing for couples sometimes, right? Because the addict's like, wait, no, I'm finally like,
we're finally okay.
What? We're finally okay, and what's going on? Why can't we move on now, right? And so if you can understand that dynamic, it can normalize that, and you can be really intentional and celebrate it as, yes, it is a sign that there's more safety. So if you think about that honesty layer, the next layer is safety. That it's a sign that we're moving into safety. We are progressing. But if we don't give you space to break apart and grieve and feel your pain, we won't keep going till trust. And so trust is that next layer. And so what's so important in that moment, or in that healing journey, is that betraying spouse can come alongside and help hold the pain of that partner and empathize and validate and listen to the ways that I've hurt you. And that's,
as opposed to, okay, we're good. Let's move past this.
Yeah. Why won't you trust me, right? What we find is when the goal is to be trusted, the process takes forever.
Yeah.
When the goal of an addict or a betraying spouse is to be trustworthy, the process actually moves fairly quickly, right? When I just focus on what is the trustworthy thing, and the trustworthy thing is that when I've hurt someone, to be present for them, right, as they are healing. That's the trustworthy thing. And so learning to do that and recognizing, I mean, this is part of the going back to the honesty phase, is knowing I might not be very good at that if I've spent a lifetime avoiding emotions, right? One of the realities of sexual addiction is it's an emotional avoidance. I don't want to feel anything, so I'm going to numb it out with anything I can. So part of my healing journey was not just for myself, but learning to feel emotions with Joanna, to be able to sit with her pain, her experience, the things that she lost. Because we recognize as we move forward, we really both lost a lot in what had happened. One of the things that Joanna lost was kind of her dream and expectation of what marriage would be. And so for years, I didn't want to talk about that part of it. I wanted to talk about, like, look at the years of the sobriety I have. Look at the chips, and the guys in my group think I'm doing really well. Let's talk about those things, right? And Joanna's like, I don't feel good every day. Some days feel bad. Can we also talk about those things? And when that space is made for a couple, that's what restores trust. That's actually the thing. I think a lot of folks who have betrayed someone, they think if I just don't do the bad thing anymore, right? If I'm just good all the time, that will mean trust. It's that plus the willingness to be with the person who is hurt and to say, I get it. And I get you're going to have some tough days too. And I'm going to be kind of holding our relationship in balance as well. The way you held it for us when I was really struggling. And that's really what's key, is recognizing, Joanna was holding our marriage together for years when I was really running from our relationship and the responsibilities that I'd signed up for. And so part of my journey was to recognize, like, okay, I can hold it now too. If you need me to hold this, I can. What was great, that allowed me to actually live into my values. That actually helped me to find the integrity of who I wanted to be. And I kind of started to build trust with myself. I started to go, I trust myself again. I trust who I am as a person, and I like that feeling. And the more I was able to trust myself, the more I found Joanna was able to trust me. And what's really beautiful is we see when couples start to do this, they enter into the parts of relationship that marriage and intimate relationships were designed for. Vulnerability, which comes after trust, and then vulnerability, which leads into this incredible life-giving intimacy. And so a lot of the later work for couples is really finding deeper connection. We tell people all the time, like, don't walk this path if you have a choice. This is not,
don't choose it.
Betrayal is not the way to have a great marriage. But the incredible gift that God gives couples is there can be a great marriage on the other side. There can be incredibly deep connection because you actually learn to be real about what is going on with you, not just in this moment of betrayal. We don't really talk about that much in our marriage day to day. We don't reminisce about those parts of our life, but we have the connection of going through it.
We know we can hold heavy, hard things together. We know we can also hold the joy, right? We're a team on both of those sides.
How long does it take, generally, from start to go, as they're moving up the pyramid?
Yeah.
Is that anything that you can even say?
And we should just say, the pyramid, you all call it the intimacy pyramid, because that's the top, is after you move through all these stages, and vulnerability is the second to last one, that you ultimately end up in true intimacy again.
Yeah.
And so,
and I know that
I want to know
everyone
that too.
is unique.
Totally.
When we were doing the research on intimacy, on sex, our co-author said people are going to come up to you and say, and ask you, how often should we? And he said, under no circumstance should you ever tell them how often.
And
because
so
everyone's unique. But yet, here I am saying, in more general terms.
Yes.
how long does it take?
Absolutely.
Our safe answer is always, it will take longer than you want, but it will also take shorter than you think. What we typically see with couples, 1 to 2 years from D-Day, right? From that kind of like discovery. But you can also see where it extends out. A lot of what it has to do is how long the betrayal took place. And, and this is not to kind of put pressure on people because I know shame can come on, but a lot of the pace is really dependent on the addict, on that betraying spouse. How much are they willing to do their work to create space for the betrayer? Eventually, that betrayed spouse, she'll need to do, or he will need to do their healing work too, right? They are going to have to explore that grief that Joanna was talking about and processing that. But the work of the betraying spouse really sets the pace and the tone.
So in some ways, we don't start the couples healing journey clock until there's extended sobriety, which if you go to the ITAP community, they'll say that can take 3 to 5 years. Now, I don't think that's the case at all, but if you really want to get to that intimacy place, healthy, sustained sobriety has to be there first. And then we can actually start doing some of that couples work, which also can easily take a few years to get through.
So talk us through that, since we talked about getting really practical.
Mm-hmm.
What would be some of the steps if somebody is like, I need to do this. I need to confess to my spouse, and I need to come in with a plan. Or maybe you suspect this and you want to talk to your spouse and have both boundaries and compassion and, and sort of say, here's a list, What would be some of the first steps that you say need to be taken just from a practical standpoint, to get to that sense of sobriety? Because I can tell you right now, even being a woman who isn't tempted by pornography, but having had now researched more than 20,000 men and having talked to thousands of men, I can feel through the podcast, cyberspace, I can feel the sense of despair from some men who feel like, I have wanted victory over this for so long. I don't know how to get to extended sobriety, and they want it desperately. But give us some helpful starting points that can give that person hope that it is actually possible and what to do.
And it will start with usually getting some type of professional help or some type of structured support. And what I usually recommend for people is some type of intensive. I do think there is something about having an experience. And what's wonderful is there's a lot of different really good men's intensives out there that offer different levels of kind of either therapeutic specialties or the ability to really help people. Some are longer, they'll go for weeks. Some are shorter, they go for weekends. But I have seen just man after man after man that I have counseled and coached have an experience to say, I feel like something opened up, something changed. Because it's usually at these places that you get the experience of that freedom, of that honesty, of naming it. And I really do think it starts there. Then the second piece is just as important, that it extends into continued work, right? So working either with a counselor, a coach, a therapist, somebody who can help you through the really early stages. I worked with a counselor for about 6 months after I did my men's intensive to really get to the underlying issue. Because what we know is the sexual addiction, the pornography use, whatever it is that I'm hiding, it's the top of the iceberg. It's really everything underneath that's causing the problems. And that deeper work in therapy and counseling and coaching can really help me to get to that.
If a person can't afford that, are men's groups a good substitute at times?
They can be, but there's also a lot of really affordable resources. We know of programs throughout the world which will offer coaching and counseling at a really affordable rate. And so it's what I think people are surprised at is sometimes how accessible good resources are.
A lot of it too is psychoeducation, right? If I'm at a point in my life and I go, I can just tell the way I'm feeling, I need to eat healthier. But I just knew nothing about eating healthy and picked random foods at the store hoping they were going to work, right? Like that would be a terrible idea. I'm going to educate myself on like what is healthy, what's healthy for my body, what do I need? Do I need more vitamins? Do I need more protein? I need to educate myself about the issue I'm working on. And so I think a lot of guys forget, like, get educated, learn about it. Yeah, nothing has probably worked because you don't actually know what you're up against. And so there are fantastic books and podcasts and listening to stories and testimonies of other people who have found freedom and what they used and why it worked. And so I think just like a lot of psychoeducation can be super helpful as well.
Yeah.
Can you give us a couple of examples of, like, when you say there's some resources that are either free or very low cost?
Yeah.
And we'll put those in the show notes.
Yes.
Yeah, one of my favorites is Naked Truth Recovery. What a great name, of course, for sexual addiction and pornography. Naked Truth. And they're actually out of the UK. And they have men's groups, they have coaching, they have different programs, and they offer really, really affordable solutions. And we can give kind of some links for some others that are really great places to start. And I think
another one is Pure Desire. Will be in a lot of churches. I know you've heard of that, right?
They're in a lot of churches, yes, and they're great.
So many churches.
And they
have
offer
this now.
groups, but they also offer counseling. They offer direct support. And so these are things that I think really can matter. And what I think people realize when I say professional resources, it doesn't mean you're going to be using these for the rest of your life. I think people maybe assume like, I'm going to be paying someone for 50 years. Oftentimes 6 months, 9 months of support can really get you on the right path.
And you might have to make some tough decisions. When we went through recovery, we lived in California and we're both full-time in grad school. We took out student loans to pay for our recovery.
Not a suggestion, by the way. Not a great idea. Those loans come back.
But we knew, like, this is so important. We're willing to make this sacrifice because what we're investing in, it's the rest of our life, and it's going to impact us and really matter. And so, like, we are investing in our future. And so we really, we were willing to do it, but it was not easy.
Yeah.
Okay, so step one, when you were talking about like an intensive something. Step two, invest in some ongoing healing for the rest of the iceberg, the stuff that's below the surface.
Absolutely.
What's the next thing? What would be the next step that you all think for that person who's listening and thinking, I've never been able to do this? Give them some hope with a next practical step.
I think there's two more things, and the next would be community. Like I said, what we know is that you can't do this in isolation. The best, one of the best resources for me beyond just those first two is I was in a group of people who were honest regularly. I loved going to my 12-step groups because they didn't lie. They were honest about their struggle. They were honest about how much they wanted it to stop. And their stories reminded me of all of the things I tried to avoid, and I still would practice trying to avoid. And so going to these groups really helped to open my eyes. So groups like Pure Desire, 12-step groups, many churches offer support groups.
And these are the same steps for the betraying spouse, the betrayed spouse, right? Getting community, finding people who understand the experience where you can be honest, and for the relationship. And so one of the things we realize both through our own experience and our work professionally is that eventually that couple needs other couples they're in community with where they can be honest, who understand their story. And so one of the things we actually developed at our practice is a couples group program for people later in the stages to be able to come together and go, yes, there are other couples out there who are going through this, who value a healthy relationship. We don't have to do this alone.
Yeah. And
That's
then
so good.
The final piece is boundaries. What many people forget is that I have to make hard choices about how I live my life. And it is really easy to access things that will destroy your life. And if you're not willing to change and to set strict boundaries, you will often struggle. And so one of the things that really helped me was a deep commitment to radically change how I lived. I was home a lot by myself with a computer, and that was not a good place for me to be in recovery. And so it didn't take long before I recognized everything has to change. So if Joanna had to leave, I would get up, I would take my computer to the Pasadena Public Library, and I would sit in the Pasadena Public Library in view of everyone, and I would be on that computer because I knew that that was a safe space. When Joanna said, I'm tired, I've got to go to bed, it didn't matter if I still had a paper due. I was like, okay, computer's closed, I'm going to bed, right? These were the choices that I learned to make, and that really do change the game for a lot of people. A lot of people want to continue to live the way they've lived, but then like not have anything change, right? It's like Joanna's saying, like I can keep eating what I eat and hoping my weight changes. That's not usually how it works.
Or I'll keep all the same food in the house. I'll just stop eating it. Like, I don't know how many times we've tried that. It's like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, no, I don't have the self-control yet.
Yeah.
So, as I hear this, Matthew, your story and talking about other guys, I think of, in my case, my teen years and 20s and, early on in our marriage, wrestled through this also. And God, through changing, through confession with Shaunti, and, God delivered me. And it was, I'm so grateful. Yeah. Nevertheless, in the decades that passed, it was almost like, I'm not a superstitious guy, but it was almost like there were times when I've been free for a decade, and I wouldn't want to tell someone that I was free because, oh my gosh, Satan is going to pile on that one, and I am going to fall. And it was just like, I can't talk about this because of the fear. And over the years, it has left, and maybe it's the extended sobriety. I don't know. Maybe it's some of it is the hair color changing. I don't know if it is that or not, or if it's just God's amazing grace. But I do want guys out there to know that you can be free, and you don't have to live in the fear of relapse. Do the right things, but there is a freedom out there, and it's amazing. So
It really is.
I thank you for saying that. I mean, I think especially people who've been caught in compulsion or addiction, there's a level of a sense of, it's just always, I'm always going to be at risk. It's going to be pulling me back down, and I think there is a need.
There is something to be vigilant.
To be vigilant.
Absolutely.
But that's not the same thing as that. It's futile. Of course, it's not futile. I love the fact that you talk about doing the work.
Exactly.
Like, you're not a victim. Like, you're not at the mercy of what's happened to you. You can absolutely do the work. And that's both spouses. Which, I mean, and I'm gonna say something that I know is I have to be very careful about how we talk about it, but I've heard this so many times from different wives of husbands who've been dealing with pornography. Now, obviously, in some cases it's flipped. Sometimes the wife is the one who has, like we were talking about earlier, the erotica addiction or whatever. But let's just talk about what is probably more the majority, which is the wife whose husband is struggling with this. I have had many wives come to me privately and say that one of the things that really helped in their healing, meaning their healing, not his healing, but their healing and building intimacy back up in their marriage, was the wife had to recognize, you know what, it was no excuse, but I was ignoring him sexually. Like, I was not engaging. I was doing everything else with the kids, and obviously, like, that is not an excuse.
Exactly, not an excuse.
It is never an excuse. That's his issue that he has to deal with. But I've had so many wives say, when I had to recognize that I may not have had a part in his addiction, but I have something to say about healing our marriage and intimacy. And I thought that was so, because people don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
Like they don't want to talk
Totally.
about the fact that there may be something that you were betrayed, it's not on you, and yet you still have a role to play in
the healing.
healing
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes talk about it like your marriage, you're having a heart attack and there might be cancer, right? The betrayal is the heart attack.
Good point.
We're going to deal with that first. We're going to deal with the
Yes.
addiction because we can't even get to the other stuff until you're stable. But yeah, absolutely. Once a couple is stable, you've rebuilt some safety, security, you're still a couple. There's still
You have
two
other things you
people
might wanna
in the
work on.
relationship.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And what's really cool is when people have had the experience of working on themselves and their relationship, it's invigorating. What we have found, the couples that we've worked with that get to that level of intimacy, they always ask us one question. What's next? Right? What do we
Oh,
get to work
that's
on
good.
next? What we find is they actually go back to the start and they'll work on their honesty or they'll work on their trust. They'll practice being more courageous. And because when you have it good, you're like, let's keep it good. And so that's part of the joy. And when I've seen men really lead the way in their recovery and be fearless and courageous and take responsibility and be humble, I've seen their wives turn around and do the very same thing. And like you said, have that stance of humility and say, you know what, there's things that I could do that would help our connection, that would help
so
us to be more of a partner. And that's the joy of the work, is realizing that it starts to build on itself. And we talk about intimate couples are life-giving. When you're ever around a couple that's really close, you can kind of feel it. You're like, I like this. Like, I like how this feels. And that's that sign of that healthiness in relationship that we're designed to be.
That's so good.
That's fantastic.
I know we're getting towards the end. I could talk to you guys for another 2 hours. Before you get to our last question, I do want to ask something for those, because we have a lot of leaders who listen to our podcast as well, who may be church staff or ministry volunteers or pastors or counselors who work closely with the church. I'd love to talk about how the church can help in this area. Now, it used to be back in the day, I think there were just tons of misunderstandings. I'm not sure that the church was always approaching this well, but I can still remember years ago when we were doing one of our very early projects, I was so impressed by the number of pastors who maybe weren't specialists or weren't trained, but were wanting to handle this well. I think that there's a desire in the church today to want to handle these issues well and be more trauma informed and, all that. So, but obviously there's still work to be done. What is one or two things that, if you're speaking to a church leader who's listening to this, that the church can put in place to have that kind of redemptive, like open-armed process for people going through this?
I think one of the pieces, especially for those leaders, is by leading with your own vulnerability. I don't know, one of the pieces of our story, I don't know if we shared this specific detail, the person who came and shared in that class gave his testimony that started the ball rolling for us. He was a church pastor. And he was a leader, and he decided to step into this and be vulnerable and be open and honest. And be honest with what he was going through. And so, a crazy part of this story, many years after he had spoken, we were on our healing journey. We moved from LA to San Diego. We were connected to some churches, helping kind of start recovery ministries, do counseling, things like that. The church we were part of set up a breakfast with Matthew and some other men to help this other church, neighboring church, start a recovery ministry. Matthew shared his story, told about that pastor who was open and honest and vulnerable. And this guy at the end of the table raises his hand up and goes, "Oh, that's my story." And Matthew's like, "Oh, you too, cool." He's like, "No, I was that pastor in your wife's class over 5 years ago. And I have been told I need to hire you and your wife to help us start a recovery ministry and a relationship ministry at our church." Wow. And we just full circle, goosebumps, right? And just had an incredible experience at that church, seeing what a leader, starting with his vulnerability, can build in a church community.
It was God was showing off that day. He was definitely like,
Yes.
watch me, mic drop, right? I was like, okay.
Yeah.
But I think
I
that I
love
think
that.
leading with vulnerability, and then I think the other thing, especially for leaders, that they may not think of is having support for both spouses.
Yes.
Something that churches do when they know about the
good.
issue of pornography, they're like, hey, we're gonna start a men's group
Get real.
on sexual brokenness, and I love it. Well, great, but what they don't realize is they have 15 men come forward, right? And now they have 15.
And their wives are sitting there going, I'm sorry, what?
Right. And so
Right.
what you can do is to make sure, do we have support for those partners, right?
Yeah.
Because they're going through their own healing journey. They need those spaces.
Yeah.
And so we've seen some really special churches create programs for both because they know that that's what's going to help those marriages to really sustain.
And realizing you can't be an expert in everything. So knowing enough to not do harm, but then having resources in your back pocket that you're going to point
That's
couples
good.
towards.
That's really fantastic, and it's the support for the spouses. I hadn't thought of that, but that is so critical because there are dark places around the internet where you can find a community to share all sorts of beliefs and thoughts on. Listen, sister, you need to dump this guy in a heartbeat.
Right.
Or hey buddy, you need to, she doesn't deserve your compassion, and you don't want them going to those places
Exactly.
to get their guidance. So we have talked, for these 2 episodes now, lots of information. I can understand if some people are going, oh my gosh, there is so much here. I'm afraid I'm going to forget the most important parts. Now, I think everything was important that was said, but if I were to say, could you guys, give me your best shot at the one takeaway that if they're not going to remember anything, and it may not even be of something that we covered here, it may be something from your practice that you think, I wish
We haven't mentioned it
I
yet.
wish we would have covered this. What would be the one thing that you'd want a couple, individual listening to remember?
Yeah. I think the greatest gift I got through my own journey, and the thing I continue to remind everyone that I work with, couples, betrayed partners, and the addicts that I get to work with, you can't go through this process alone. You really have to surround yourself with the resources you deserve. I think for a long time, the shame of my actions told me that I didn't deserve to have people help me with this. And so breaking through that and realizing, no, I actually deserve to have people walk alongside this journey with me. And so really inviting people in, right? Even if you're betrayed, it's the same thing. You need people to walk through, like you said, because there are a lot of dark voices on both sides of this issue that will lead you further into pain. But there are also incredibly wonderful voices of light, compassion, and hope that will remind you of what's possible. And so really connecting with people and with resources is so key.
I think remembering that this is possible. Healing is possible. There is hope for you. Whatever your story is, and trust me, we have heard all the stories and we have seen couples heal and come through this. And I think also kind of attached to that, maybe some point, is that it's worth it. I know for me, when we dove into this journey, I was like, I know I want to stay married, but I feel like I will always be just a little bit disappointed in the marriage that we're able to create. And that's not true. That is absolutely a lie. We have a marriage that I could have never dreamed of back when we first got together. And so realizing it's going to be hard work, but it is worth it.
That's so good. So how can people find you? How can people find your ministry and your practice?
Absolutely. We're pretty easy. Raabsmithsteam.com. And we love people to get connected with us. One of the things that people can do, and we'll put the link up, they can go to raabsmithsteam.com/free. And we actually created a way to get more honest in your relationship. We talked about the importance of honesty. And one of the things that we've learned is that things that you learn in recovery, every couple can learn from. So even if this isn't your issue, we'd love for you to go and get this resource. It's a daily check-in for couples to help them to connect, to be more honest, to be more reflective, and to kind of create that space. And so we'd love for people to connect with us, be in touch, reach out.
Yeah, there's also an intimacy pyramid assessment that just went up a few weeks ago where couples can go in and go through it and kind of figure out, where are we in terms of honesty, safety, trust, vulnerability, intimacy, how strong, and maybe what are the areas we need to grow in.
Oh, that's so good. Oh, thank you guys.
Yeah, really.
Thank you.
And I loved the fact that we lured you in with saying it was only going to be 30 minutes. And we have totally blown through that 35 minutes ago.
Seriously.
So, thank you for being good sport.
Wonderful.
I'm going to encourage everybody to check out Matthew and Joanna Raabsmith's book as well, Building True Intimacy. We're going to put links and to their website and everything they just said in the show notes. And also, please share today's episode and tag the Raabsmiths on all your social media channels. Thank you, guys. Thanks for listening to I Wish You Could Hear This. Remember to subscribe to our podcast. And as always, forward today's audio or video link to a friend, counselor, or pastor who would be encouraged.